We're going to explore a little bit our approach about working motivationally with men who abuse, and that will touch on some of the issues that were raised in the chat this morning about reconciling individual psychological approaches with structural, broadly pro-feminist approaches. And then finally, there's going to be another breakout to provide the opportunity for you and smaller groups to discuss the learning from our experience that might be helpful in your own national setting. So very briefly, a little bit of political context. At the turn of the century, Scotland had just had a new governmental system introduced, devolution of many, many significant parts of government from the UK government to Scotland. And two of the key priorities for the new government, or the two that were relevant for this discussion, are reducing the very high prison population. Scotland has had and has one of the highest prison populations in Western Europe, and developing and accrediting effective community-based programs for all types of offenders, so not just domestic abuse. And in order to deal with this, or to meet this need, they established an expert accreditation panel and fund delivery of a whole variety of different kinds of offending behaviour programmes, and domestic abuse was one of those, and we became part of writing that bid for that accreditation process. And then the second high priority was tackling very high rates of domestic abuse and increasing women and children's safety. I won't say which was the biggest priority for the government. I wouldn't dare to presume which was the biggest, but they were both big priorities. Significant changes in police practice and court practices, and they set up a national domestic abuse group to develop a domestic abuse strategy with the women's sector, with prison, criminal justice, social work, with health, with child protection agencies, a whole range of agencies, and they developed a domestic abuse strategy based on a gendered analysis. I'm not going to give you that whole analysis because it's quite complicated, but it's been really, really significant to us that the Scottish Government formally, all aspects of it, have formally adopted a gendered analysis of domestic abuse. Just drawing out a few points from the analysis. Domestic abuse is described as a pattern of behaviour, not individual isolated acts. That's really significant for us, and I'm sure for everyone in the room. That has come to fruition in a Coercive Control Act, which was passed in the Scottish Parliament last year. We are talking predominantly, if not overwhelmingly, men as perpetrators and women as victims. It doesn't deny that there may be other forms of abuse, but predominantly that's what we're talking about. And crucially, this behaviour needs to be understood in the historical and current context of gender inequality. I think it follows from that that the behaviour that we're talking about is learned and functional behaviour for those that are using it. Particularly thinking about how that gender analysis helps us to engage with men. And that's really crucial because we think the gender analysis is not about punishing men, but actually helps us to engage with men. So really key things are men and women are brought up in a society where gender roles are defined and unequal. Again, lots of talk about that this morning. And very obviously from that, we know that men may develop unrealistic or distorted expectations of women and children arising from those gendered role expectations. And when I first started doing this work 30 years ago, that was what I thought was the key thing. Over the years, I have come to think that almost more significant than unrealistic expectations of women and children brought about by gender inequality is the unrealistic expectations that men may have of themselves. And again, this was touched on this morning, and we haven't got a great deal of time to explore it in more detail than the speakers did very competently this morning. But just to highlight that when we've been producing the the evidence for the accredited programme, it was very clear that in the academic world, there is a massive split between those who have socio-cultural explanations for domestic abuse and those that have individual psychological explanations. And I've said rather grandly that I think this is a false dichotomy. So for us, the socio-cultural ones will look at gender inequality and socioeconomic status as the explanatory factors, and the psychological explanations will be about early abuse or trauma or harsh parenting or damaged, insecure, disorganized attachments or personality disorders, substance misuse, low self-esteem, all of those individual factors that we're all aware of from the literature. We believe that we are reconciling, in our approach to working with men, we are reconciling the two approaches. And the example, and I gave it in the chat this morning. So, for example, we know that jealousy is a key factor in a lot of, particularly the most dangerous, risky domestic abuse. Jealousy is a universal human emotion. Men and women both experience it, and it may be linked to past trauma experiences or past damaged attachment. That seems quite likely. If you add to that gendered expectations of men being in control, of sexual entitlement, of the distorted notions of what relationship real men should have with women, if you add that to an individually damaged person who has experienced extreme jealousy, that becomes exponentially more dangerous. So it's individual damage, but it plays out in gendered ways, and it plays out in gendered ways in so many kinds of examples. So when we were presenting our programme to the accreditation panel, we said this is not like other offending. This is not just about a behaviour change programme. You need to look at the whole picture. We thought, what are the factors that we need to address if we're addressing domestic abuse? And they were, broadly speaking, in three clusters: men's risks, women and children's vulnerabilities, and service-generated risks and supports. And the next slide explains this in a bit more detail. So the first circle, the risks that we know, and we know increasing amounts about the risks that are present in domestic abuse. The tool that we use is the same one that was mentioned many times this morning, which is SARA, and particularly SARA version 3, which has not just looking at static and dynamic risk factors for men, but also looking at vulnerability factors for women, and also helping with case formulation. So, men's risks. Second cluster are women and children's vulnerabilities. So they may be things which pre-exist before the relationship in which abuse occurs. They may be something that is exacerbated by the abuse, or they may be caused by the abuse. So for an example would be isolation. A socially isolated woman might be targeted by an abusive man, but so much of a pattern of coercive control is about increasing a woman's isolation in order to increase his control. So that would be an example of women and children's vulnerabilities. And then finally, a whole group of risks that are potentially generated by our involvement, our services, or by wider societal structures or organisations or attitudes. So some examples of this might be, and we're about to break up into a small group to allow you to explore this in more detail. But I'm just going to draw on three different examples before we split into the group. So it was touched on this morning. Our very involvement can increase risk if it encourages women to lower their guard, to be over-optimistic about change. So by our involvement, we might increase her risk. Inconsistent police practices. If women call the police and they are not getting a reliable, consistent response from the police, it's going to make them less likely to call the police. And probably the biggest service-generated risk is in the field of child protection. A child protection process which focuses on the woman's failure to protect the child rather than on the perpetrator's behaviour and responsibility to change, can mean that women feel judged, that women don't just feel judged, women are judged, and feel that their only choice is to separate from the man, and if they have any ambivalent feelings or if they are in having contact with the man, they are not able to divulge that because of fear that their children are going to be taken away. So that attitude and that approach to child protection makes women more at risk. So those are 3 examples. But if we could go on and now think about the breakout rooms. So that concept of service generated, if you think about the 3 circles, the men's risks, the women's vulnerabilities, and the service generated risks, I don't think you need to spend more time thinking about vulnerabilities and risks, but service generated risks. Could you, in your groups, think about how your services and organisations and wider structures might increase risk for women and children, and crucially, what could you and or your organisation do to mitigate these risks?
Jill?
Is that everybody back?
Yep.
Yeah.
Great, okay, thanks for coming back, everyone. If anyone has got any questions, can you start putting them in the chat at the side, and we'll address them towards the end. So let's have a discussion about service-generated risks. I hope that you will have some of these that we've written up here will have came out in your conversations, but I'll go through this list with you. And what I want to say is that this is not an exhaustive list. There will be many more, but it gives us something to start with when we are thinking about service-generated risks. So, professionals' beliefs and opinions, that is a massive service-generated risks. If you think about your own organisation or people that you've worked with over the years, then when I think of it, there are many people that I have worked with that don't believe men can change their behaviour, that believe it may be the woman's fault, that believe it's women's vulnerabilities that cause them to get into domestic abusive relationships. So that's something that we've always got to be aware of. And I know that in the field of social work that I work in, you would hope that every worker had the same beliefs and opinions, but as you know, we don't. A second one is limited access to services. So, for example, Scotland, parts of Scotland is incredibly remote, as it will be in many of your countries. So, if professionals are advising a woman to access the support of Women's Aid, for example, well, that may not be available in the area that they live in. Also, police response times to domestic abuse incidents can vary dramatically. So in Glasgow city centre or Edinburgh city centre, the police response will be very quick. However, if someone lives in Highlands of Scotland, they can be waiting 2-3 hours for police to respond to a call for help. That is a massive service-generated risk. Also having an incident-based approach, which we know used to be very common within Scotland, is changed now, but that may be the same in some countries where you are practicing. Not recognising a pattern of abusive behaviour is very dangerous. Confidentiality breaches, where women's addresses may be leaked intentionally or non-intentionally, and it happens so often in my experience in child protection settings and in legal settings as well, where breaches of confidentiality happen, where information that a woman may have shared confidentially that really impacts on her safety is shared in court reports and child protection reports, where that information could only have come from her. So then the perpetrator will know that she has shared that information, and that puts her at greater risk. A massive service-generated risk is lack of funding and lack of resources. I'm sure many of you have been impacted by this, and I know that the Scottish Government are committed to addressing domestic abuse, but I know that's not the same across Europe, and it's something that as practitioners we always have to be campaigning for more funding in this field. Lack of knowledge and skills. Now, I know as a group of professionals we are experienced in domestic abuse, but when I think about my own training as a social worker, which was, the training was 10, 15 years ago. However, there was absolutely no training in that course on domestic abuse. And I know that even social work courses now in Scotland, there's a couple of hours given to domestic abuse, and yet domestic abuse cuts across all areas of social work, as we know. Failure to recognise service-generated risks, in my opinion, is one of the biggest risks that we pose to women and their children. Failing to recognise that us being involved increases the risk to her. If there's poor communication between the perpetrator workers and the victim support workers, that's a service-generated risk too. And I know that historically women's services have tended to keep information to themselves. They don't want to share information, but we know that the best way to keep women and children safe is to have really effective communication strategies with each other, whilst maintaining the confidentiality of the women and, at times, the man. Another service-generated risk is that men can use any perpetrator programme to further their abuse. Now, whether that is through learning further abusive tactics in a group setting, so learning from other men, or from when they understand how to control their own emotions and behaviour better. If their partner is not doing that, then challenging them and saying that they're the abusive ones. And also using the programme to influence child protection services. So someone said it earlier on today, saying that he is attending a behaviour change programme automatically means that he's changing his behaviour and should have access to his children, for example, where we know that's not the case. Rory touched on this earlier. Focusing on the woman's failure to protect is a significant service-generated risk, and it's the one that I've came across most in my professional experience. So in child protection proceedings, the focus being on the mother failing to protect the child, rather than focusing on what the man has done to abuse the child and the woman and how he has impacted upon the family's functioning. So for example, in Scotland, historically, men weren't invited to child protection meetings, perpetrators, so they were completely excluded from the process, which meant at the meeting, professionals solely focused on the woman's behaviour and her parenting, whereas the very reason that the meeting was called was because of his abusive behaviour. And that's what we are shifting to in Scotland now, completely focusing on the perpetrator's pattern of abusive behaviour and supporting the woman in the decisions that she has made. Another big issue that we'll know is the focus always being on ending relationships. I know through contact with colleagues in the police, it was very frustrating when they kept going back to the same call out where the woman was phoning again and again, and they would say, why does she not just end this relationship? Child protection colleagues would say the same. If she would just end the relationship, then we'll not need to be involved as a child protection agency. And yet what we know is that when a relationship ends, that's when the risk significantly increases. So we should move away from ending relationships. And yet I know many colleagues that still talk in that language. Also, there is so many domestic abuse programs out there, varying perspectives, varying approaches. How complicated and complex must that be for victims to try and navigate? Again, that's a service-generated risk. And the final one is ignoring the perpetrator's ability to change. I believe that men can change their abusive behaviour. That's why I work in this field, and I've seen it so many times over my career. But many people don't believe that perpetrators can change and that he has got strengths. And we know that if we build up his strengths, build up his confidence, build up his belief in himself, he is more likely to be motivated to change his behaviour. So definitely ignoring his ability to change is a service-generated risk. So let's go back to the Caledonian intervention model again that Rory introduced earlier. So when we are working with risk, it's the men's programme that addresses that, and I'll talk more about that in a minute. Within the Caledonian system, the three parts to it, you've got the men's programme, you've got the women's service, and what this worker does is work with the victim from the moment the man is referred to the Caledonian programme. And this work will include advocacy for the woman. It will include helping her understand the court process. It will include helping her understand the work that the man is doing on the programme. We will get feedback from the woman on the changes that he is or is not making whilst he's on the programme. The children's service is also there, and the job of the children's worker is to ensure that the child does not fall through the gaps, to ensure that all of their needs have been met, and to provide them with individual support if needed in relation to their domestic abuse experiences. And all that is done within a multi-agency context. We are committed to sharing information with all our multi-agency partners, with police, with health, with child protection, and this is done regularly. And what we do at these meetings as a Caledonian team is highlight the service-generated risks, because what we don't want to do is become too scared to practice because of service-generated risks. It shouldn't do that, but we need to highlight that we're there, because if we know that they're there, then we can do something about them. Next slide. Okay, so the aim of the men's programme is obviously it's to increase women and children's safety. But what I love about the Caledonian system is it's there to improve the lives of women, children, and of men. And that is really significant. When we first said that, we were quite scared about saying that. We're saying that we want to improve men's lives, and yet they're the ones that are causing harm to their family and to society. So it was quite brave to say that at the time. But in doing so, we believe it's helped motivate men to want to be part of the Caledonian system. We assist men to sort of unpick and understand the attitudes and beliefs that have underpinned their use of abusive behaviour. We help them understand where it comes from, because if they understand where it comes from, then they're more likely to be able to do something effective about it. The aim of the programme is also to increase men's accountability for their behaviour, and what we want to do when we're doing that is not for men to say, yes, it was me, I did it. We want them to take responsibility and do something to repair any damage that they've caused, and to increase the safety of their own families. Because we believe that the majority of men that we work with, they don't like who they are, they don't like the person that they've become, and they don't want to be that person. So if the work that we do increases their accountability, and then it's their choice whether they choose to change their behaviour or not. Because as we know, we can't change someone's behaviour. All we can do is give them the tools and the knowledge and the skills to change their behaviour if they want to, so that they behave in a non-abusive way to their partners. So, the way that we work with men is that we are optimistic about the possibility of change. We're social workers. It's our job to motivate people. So we are, in every session that we are with the man, we are optimistic that he can change his behaviour. Now, we're not unrealistic. I mean, it's important, there's a sense of realism about what we do. However, we have to be optimistic. We're very humane in the way that we work with the men. We get alongside them. We work together with them on the process. We are not dogmatic in any way. So we don't wag a big finger and say, you have done this, you have done that, because that's not helpful at all. We're humane. We get alongside them. We discuss their lives with them. We understand, but we don't collude. So it's getting that balance right, being humane and optimistic, but never colluding with their abusive behaviour. And we create the space for them to be able to talk about their lives, their relationships, why they behave the way that they do. And we encourage them, and we trust the process. Behaviour change is not going to happen overnight. Men that come on a Caledonian order are with us for 2 years. So I'm not expecting behaviour change in 4 weeks or even 8 weeks. I believe it'll take time, and I trust that process. And every intervention that I do with a man, I trust it is helping him change his behaviour. And even if when I'm sitting in a room with him, he doesn't seem to be getting it, or isn't showing enough empathy, or isn't understanding what I'm saying, I still believe that change and that understanding can happen at any time. It may be on the bus when he's going home after our appointment. It may be 5 weeks later. It doesn't matter when it happens, as long as it happens. It's important that we create dissonance with men that we work with. So when we are talking about the man's attitudes and beliefs, we question them. We say, okay, so that is your belief, but has that served you well? Is it working for you? Is that helping you behave the way that you believe a man should, or the way that you want to behave? So we question everything all the time. Once we've created the relationship with the man, so we've earned the right to do that. We recognise that the reasons for abusive behaviour can be down to personality traits, damaged attachments, it's related to individual needs. However, it's still gendered, and Rory spoke about that earlier, so I'll not go over that again. And we always ask men when we work with them, what kind of a man do you want to be? What kind of a father do you want to be? And again, that helps create dissonance. So when we're talking about abusive behaviour, we say, is that the kind of man that you want to be? Is that the type of father that you want to be? And all our work is trauma sensitive. It's important that we do not cause any more harm to, obviously, to the victims and children, but also to the men that we work with, because that would just increase disengagement, and that's not what we want to do. And in the Caledonian, children are front and centre of everything that we do. So it's the men's workers, the women's worker, and the children's workers' responsibility to ensure that children's needs are being addressed consistently throughout the time that we are working with the family. So in Scotland, the Caledonian is delivered on a court-mandated basis, and it's funded wholly by the Scottish Government. And men attend as a condition of a community payback order or post-release licence. So it's a condition of their order that they must attend the Caledonian programme for 24 months. And it is delivered by community justice social work, usually on the whole, or in collaboration with third sector organisations. So for example, community justice social work can deliver the men's programme, but perhaps Women's Aid might deliver the support for the women and the children's services. Now, the model can also be used on a non-court mandated basis, and we've had several a project in Scotland that has delivered it successfully on a non-court mandated basis, where men have volunteered to come along. They have said that we want help and have come voluntarily to the programme. Usually it's with a bit of a carrot and a stick from Children and Families Social Work. However, they have volunteered, and we are in the process of rolling that out across Scotland at the moment. So let's go back into our groups and have a wee think about everything that I've said. And can you answer maybe these two questions? What do you think would need to happen in your area to enable this type of system to be developed? Or if you've already got that sort of system developed, where you've got a women's service, children's service, men's service, all working together, what are the political barriers that you've came across, and how have you overcome them, or how would you overcome them if you've not got this type of system set up yet? Thank you.